Up is Antyzer. Hey, Antyzer, how you doing?
Wait, you're a patron, so you can speak as long as you want.
Oh my god, that's a lie.
Alright.
Alright, I'll start the timer then.
Alright, hey Aiden, it's been a while.
Hey, how you doing, Antyzer? Hey, Aussie.
Right. Yep. So, recently I've agreed with you on your reformist takes. I'm now a stinky reformist, as you know. And I've been discussing this with some other leftists. You know how Discord goes. Talk to people, get shit on, get made fun of because you didn't read theory, that sort of thing. And what I'm interested in. I have 3 technical questions. 2 are related to each other. 1 isn't. But what are your thoughts? And if you have any critiques on historical materialism, like I've noticed in your video on what was it? Poverty, I think the game poverty video. You mentioned how like you viewed it was either you or Paul Cockshot who viewed historical material or like the modes of production and stuff like that as like phases or something like that. But yeah, that's basically that. What do you think of historical materialism? What are your critiques on it, if you have any?
Sure. So I think usually historical materialism means something like material conditions are the biggest, or sometimes sole, but usually people mean biggest determinant of how like ideologies form and fundamentally how society is structured. So usually people say the base is the economy, the superstructure is like how society is structured, the redistribution of resources in that, the ideological mechanism, media, and so on. All of that is determined ultimately by, or mostly by, the economy. And that's like what I understand as classic historical materialism. Is that your conception, or? I love you.
Yeah, it's more or less, it's I think, well, I'm like relatively new to this whole left thing, right? So from what I gathered, it was more about like class antagonism and how that affects like where society goes. I think that was more of it. So that's sort of like this sort of vibe that I.
So I guess the reason that I think that historical materialism isn't a great explanation of a lot of trends we see is stuff like. I mean, so I constantly recommend Hirsch, Politics is for Power. He does suggest a somewhat materialist explanation for people getting involved in social politics, which is that people reached a certain income and they cared less about material issues. They care more about social issues, basically. But on the other hand, there are enormous disparities of belief about ideology within any income group. I think there's this one study I posted which showed that for like 48 issues in the United States, the income gaps were larger than the ideology. I'm sorry, the income gaps were smaller than the like cross-partisan gaps for like, I want to say they were smaller for like 43 out of 48 or something like that, like almost all of them. And similarly, we find that even among the very rich in the United States, there's a decent number of like liberals and even like left-leaning politics among them. And so it seems like on the personal level, material conditions is not a great explanation of individual ideology. And also at like a more structural level, it seems like even with like broadly similar like economic conditions, societies can choose pretty radically degrees of redistribution and societal structuring. Like the Nords aren't that fundamentally different from like the United States, but they spend like 25% more via taxes. They have like 90+% union membership. We have 8. I don't think that material conditions can fundamentally explain those if like we're just taking a crass view of like a broad economic trends. I think there's a significant role for ideology to explain. And Paul Cockshot critiques a person called Antyzer, who partially advances that this theory that instead of like the economy determining the material conditions, it's instead the other way around, that ideology determines the material conditions of the economy and like how things are distributed. And I tend to agree more with that the more that I've read about it seems like to me the really important role of like media and culture in shaping how things function.
Okay. Also, like, I'm gonna assume that's moving on to the second bit. So it's somewhat related. So in my discussions with more like MLs and stuff like that, I've received these 2 questions a lot, which is so I'm quoting: can you show me a historical mode of production that was established peacefully? And the other question is, what is the dialectical analysis of reformist/democratic socialism? Which I'm sure you don't necessarily agree with one of those questions, or 2, I don't know. But so what are your thoughts on these questions? How would I, as a reformist, respond?
So I think the first one's really interesting because the best example of capitalism that comes to mind is also the one that was achieved through reformism. It's England. It's fucking the UK. There after 1649, as far, I believe that's the date, there were no more major wars. There were like insurrections, sure, but there were no civil wars of the type that actually changed government structure or meaningfully affected government structure. There weren't even revolutions of like the level of like 1848 that you saw in many other countries. It was basically a series of reforms from feudalism towards capitalism towards like the modern conception of capitalism. Jangles, I love your video on system justification theory. So to me, when you look at it, it seems like I really recommend the book The Narrow Corridor by Darren Acemoglu, which I think explains a whole lot about like these gradual trends of basically the bourgeois seizing power gradually from the landed elites and establishing like liberal democracy, what was called, or like capitalist democracy, bourgeois democracy, basically democracy for the rich, and using that power in turn to further and further and further entrench themselves. They didn't need to kill the aristocrats because they could just take their power away by getting more money and getting more political power, and that was it. Like, and I think that I would also argue that we've seen such an enormous like change in like the amount of welfare and like distribution that in a very real way the capitalism of today functions very dissimilarly to the capitalism of like the 1800s. Now whether that's like a change of the means of production is like a different question, but I do think it's easy to see that there have been enormous changes, truly enormous changes that have not required like open war or revolution.
Okay, with that, 5 minutes is up.
Wait, no, I have one question.
No, give me the last question. Give me the last question.
Please go on.
Oh my god. Oh
Please.
my fucking god.
Anyway, SDL. So recently I've been looking into economics, and one interesting piece of economics is this school of economics known as ligma from India. What are your thoughts on this?
Antyzer, you're gonna try to get me to do a ligma joke, okay? And I'm not gonna do it.
Alright, they're out. Okay. That was a worthy effort though, holy shit.
Hey, Gaboblin.